One of the comments on a clip from episode 12, Follow the Light / Spiritual Warfare, said, "Those who stand in bright light cast dark shadows." Then another person replied, "For all its brightness, love casts long shadows." And honestly, that got me thinking, because it sounds profound. It sounds true, and in a certain sense, it is, at least in the physical world. After all, every physical light casts a shadow. Every candle, every lamp, every sunrise, put an object in front of a light source and a shadow appears. That's just physics. But the question is, does that principle apply to God? Because Scripture says two very specific things. God is light and God is love. So if every light casts a shadow, does God's light cast one too? I don't think it does. And the reason is that God is not merely a brighter version of created things. He is categorically different. We often take truths about creation and accidentally project them onto the Creator. As Brennan Manning said, we refashion God in our own image and are surprised when he winds up being as vengeful, resentful, selfish, and indifferent as we are. But God is not a flashlight. God is not the sun. God is not one object among many. He is the source of being itself, the source of truth, the source of goodness, the source of love, the source of light. And I believe it was Wes Huff who said, it's important to note that God is love, but that does not mean light is God and love is God. God is love and God is light, but that doesn't mean light is God and love is God. A shadow cast when someone blocks light. That is what a shadow is. It has no substance of its own. It is the absence of illumination. And this is remarkably similar to how Christianity has traditionally understood evil. Not as a thing, not as an equal opposite force, not as some dark substance competing against God, but as privation, an absence, a corruption, a distortion of what should be there. Just as darkness is the absence of light, evil is the absence of good. This is one of the reasons I've become so passionate about rejecting the Hermetic principle of polarity. The idea that every good requires an equal evil, that light requires darkness, that love requires hate, that good requires evil. I don't believe that, because Genesis contains distinctions before it contains corruption. Light and darkness are separated before the fall. Land and sea are separated before the fall. Male and female exist before the fall. Difference is not evil. Distinction is not corruption. Order is not oppression. Creation contains structure before it contains sin. Now, somebody might say, okay, Eric, but what about suffering? What about heartbreak? What about loss? Don't those things create shadows around love? And I think that's a fair question, because in our fallen world, they often do. The greater the love, the greater the grief when something is lost. The greater the beauty, the more painful its corruption appears. The brighter the light, the more obvious the darkness becomes. But that's not because love creates evil. It's because love reveals what evil destroys. When Christ enters a room, darkness is exposed. not created, exposed. The same way sunlight reveals dust that was already there. The light didn't create the dust, it simply revealed it. So I understand the sentiment. Those who stand in bright light cast dark shadows, and for all brightness, love casts along long shadows. There is poetic truth in that observation, but I don't think it's ultimately true of God himself, because God is not merely light, he is light, and God is not merely loving, he is love. And scripture tells us God is light, and in him there is no darkness at all. That's in John. Not a little, not some, not a necessary opposite, none. And that matters, because if darkness is not co-eternal with light, if evil is not necessary for good, if corruption is not required for beauty, then our hope is not in balance. Our hope is in redemption. The final victory is not equilibrium between good and evil. The final victory is that darkness is driven out altogether. Death is swallowed up and defeated. Death has lost its sting. And that is why, again, I return to, you do not defeat darkness by studying darkness endlessly. You defeat darkness by looking for, focusing on, aiming at, following, walking in the light.